Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Wednesday, September the 17th, and welcome to our commentary. I just saw this maybe an hour or so ago. They took a poll and in New York City, and this fellow Mandami has a very big lead. And the people who bet on these things, these agencies who tell you what the odds are, he's got huge odds that he's going to win. That he's going to win the mayor's race. So when that happens, and I think it probably will, I don't see any other candidate closing the gap. I mean, ideally, if two of them dropped out, then there may be, let's say, Cuomo versus Mandami. That might be very close. Probably Cuomo wins, but that's not going to happen from what we can see. What's going to happen is that Mandami is going to be elected. And he's going to become the story of this election. You can forget about New Jersey. You can forget about Virginia. Mandami is going to become the story of the election. And he's going to dominate the coverage. He's going to be interviewed by every one of these news shows. He's going to be the face of the party. And that's not fair, because I don't think he represents the face of I don't think he represents Democrats in general. I think, from what we can tell, there's a lot more opposition to him from the more traditional Democrats. But nevertheless, he will be the face, or at least he's going to get the bulk of the coverage. And the Democrats are going to have to live with this. And I think that's going to be a real problem for them. I really do. I think a lot of them were hoping that this guy would go away, but he hasn't. And it looks like he's going to be around at least another 4 years, I guess, until the next election. And it's going to be a real problem for him. So anyway, I have a post over at the American Thinker today where I talk about Brazil. If you've been following the situation in Brazil, and I know a lot of Americans probably not going to be following politics out of Brazil, even though Brazil is a huge country, not just geographically, but I mean, they're the 8th largest economy in the world. I mean, that's a big economy down there in Brazil. But again, I don't know how much trade they do with the United States. I would assume quite a bit. But for most people, when they think of Brazil, they think of Rio and the beach and maybe the Amazon. It's, a country of incredible beauty, incredible natural resources. And yeah, they have a lot of very interesting things down there, especially soccer. They're kind of the big powerhouses in soccer, as you will see in the World Cup whenever it happens next year, or whenever it happens. But Brazil right now is undergoing a major political crisis, and it's very similar to what happened up here with President Trump, where the current president and the Supreme Court of Brazil are basically trying to put the former president out of business. And the Supreme Court has found them guilty. And there's great opposition in Brazil to it, because the sense from many Brazilians, particularly the more independent thinking Brazilians, is that this is a big frame. He's being framed, in other words, that this is a big move on the part of the current president, Lula, to eliminate Bolsonaro. And he may get away with it. They have found him guilty, I guess, of trying to steal the elections. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? And, Bolsonaro is 70 years old, and they have found him guilty for 27 years. So, I mean, that's ridiculous right there to begin with. So, look, I think the public in Brazil is already bitterly divided. It's a very divided country between left and right. I mean, very seriously divided country. Also, if you look at the geography of Brazil, it's amazing. One portion is very conservative, the other one maybe more liberal. So I think you're going to see some major political unrest in Brazil if they don't come to their senses, and basically end this kind of lawfare down there in Brazil. What I think they need to do is what the Supreme Court of the United States did when several states tried to get President Trump off the ballot. The Supreme Court basically said, look, Colorado, Maine, whatever the states were, this is a political matter, and let the voters decide whether or not they bring him back. And that's honestly what they need to do in Brazil. They need to say, let the voters decide whether or not to bring this guy back and see what happens. Let the voters decide. Let them decide. And my guess is that it would be a very close election. Not sure who would win, but at least the voters decide instead of having judges and courts decide when these judges and the court is seen by at least half of the country as being extremely unfair and corrupt. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what develops down there in Brazil. But as I say, it's a huge country. It's a huge country, over 200 million people. And they need to get their political situation in order because the people are very angry. They're very angry. Well, let's say half of the country is very angry and the other half supports eliminating Bolsonaro. It's the classic clash of one half versus the other half. Very similar, actually, very similar to what we saw here in recent years. Well, if you've been watching the news, you may have heard that in Texas, the governor, and I've got a post coming out about this tomorrow, the governor in Texas has basically put a bunch of teachers on administrative leave. Now, these are public teachers, public school teachers. And the problem is that a lot of teachers in Texas decided to get political with respect to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And you had kids going home saying to their parents that they saw the video, you know, the one which is very graphic when Charlie was shot in the neck. And then you have other teachers who got involved, you know, calling him a racist, you know, the usual stuff they call conservatives. And many of these kids went home and they told their parents, and the parents went ballistic, and rightfully so. I mean, you don't go to school to preach your position one way or the other. Now, you can have a conversation about the shooting of Charlie Kirk. You could talk about it generally. You can say, for example, yes, he was shot. He was a conservative activist. You can say that. But you need to say, look, this is not the way we do it. We don't kill people. But when you start talking about, well, this is what he asked for, this is what he deserved, and, you know, he's a threat to the country and a fascist, you know, I'm sure you've all heard the words, then that crosses a line. And I think the governor is correct here in putting these teachers on administrative leave. And obviously, each case will be settled. But look, teachers should not be doing this. That's not why they get paid. They don't get paid to preach whatever politics they have. They get paid, particularly in the grade school and junior high and high school. They get paid to teach our kids how to read, write, and do multiplication, and obviously learn some history along the way. And when you have teachers getting this political about Charlie Kirk, I think they violate. I don't know if they technically violate their contract, but they clearly violate the trust of the parents, because there's a lot of very angry parents in Texas for the fact that younger kids were shown the video and many teachers were saying things about Charlie Kirk that were completely inappropriate for a classroom. Again, if they want to be political activists, I don't care. They can be political activists. Just don't do it when you're the teacher in the classroom. That's not the place for your political activism. You can do it other places, but not in the classroom. So I congratulate the governor of Texas for taking bold action here and at least reminding everybody that these teachers work for the parents. They don't work for some political activity. They work for the parents, and they have to behave. If they don't behave, then there will be consequences, to say the least. You may have seen, you know, a clip that was on TV between Senator Cruz and I think it was CNN, where the reporter at CNN, I think it was Caitlin Collins, was arguing with Senator Cruz that we're not really sure yet what the motive is for the guy who shot Charlie Kirk. We're not really sure, you know, we're not exactly sure yet. Well, I think we know why he shot him. He shot him for political reasons. I think that's why he did it. You don't have to be a genius to figure that one out. But it seems like there are some people in the country who just don't want to make that connection between the reality that, you know, some of these trans-oriented people have committed some crimes. Not all of them, of course. But look at Minnesota. Look at Nashville. Look at this. So obviously there is a problem there. But nobody wants to talk about it. They rather talk about Trump, or they rather talk about Charlie Kirk or whatever. And I think we need to have a conversation about what's happening with some of these young people who are into the trans movement, because many of them are getting very radical and getting violent. I'm not saying all of them, okay? Don't misunderstand, not all of them. But we need to have that conversation. And if we're not honest about it, then we're not going to get very far in connecting with each other here in the country. Well, speaking of connecting, it was 238 years ago today. That would make it 1787 that the U.S. Constitution was finally drafted and approved by the delegates in Philadelphia. It was then sent to the states for ratification, and most of them came back fairly soon. I think Connecticut was the first one, or Rhode Island, one of those was the first one, and they eventually got the majority, and eventually it was enacted, and President Washington was elected, and the whole thing was going, what we now call the United States of America. But it was on this day in 1787 that they finally completed the product that they spent the entire summer working on. And by the way, there's a great book that I would recommend, especially to the young people. There's a great book called Miracle in Philadelphia, written by some lady back in the 1940s. The book's been around for a while, maybe longer than 1940s, but it's a great book. She traces the history of what happened in Philadelphia that summer, and goes through kind of what was going on, what were some of the battles going on in Philadelphia. And it's really a neat book. It's a really neat book. And I got a copy of it back in 1987 when it was the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. And I remember getting a copy. There was a special somewhere, and I picked up a copy. And it's a fun book to read. It reads very quickly. It reads very well. And it's super informative. You'll get to know the so-called founding fathers a lot better after reading that book. Well, have a great week, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.